Welcome to the Digital Responsibility Podcast. There is a vibrant community around the world exploring how we drive forward digital innovation, products and services, and generally exploit technology progression for the sustained benefit of society and the planet. On this podcast, you will hear from me, Christopher Johnson, and Rob Price, two of the original founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility, as we speak to our guests to hear their stories and piece together what it means to be responsible in the digital age. If you'd like to learn more, take a look at the website, corporatedigitalresponsibility.net.
Hi, and welcome to episode 8 of the 4th season of the Digital Responsibility Podcast. And tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Finnis and Andrea Ravnik from Amazon. Paul, can I start with yourself in terms of an introduction around perhaps kind of the Learning Foundation, but also the Digital Poverty Alliance? We'll come to that and the work and the focus of it shortly. But how did you get involved in that? Give us a kind of kick off.
Okay. I'll try and keep it short as well, because I'm well known for talking a long time. But no, I joined the Learning Foundation in 2015 as chief executive, and that is a charity that's been around for 21 years, focusing mainly on supporting schools and families on engaging with technology and learning. And what we kept finding, though, Rob, was that very, very large numbers of children and young people at home were just not connected at all, or weren't being connected at all. What we were also finding at the same time is that schools, and this won't be news to anybody, schools were struggling with, inadequate budgets, with, problems with resources and recruitment and a whole variety of other things, which meant that much as they might want to engage with technology and delivering technology as being one of the means of delivering learning and things, what they were struggling with is to actually make that happen. So our job was to make that happen, but we kept, as I say, discovering these very large numbers of children who were disconnected and families disconnected. And the trustees basically said, we need to do something about this. If we can't work through schools, which is by far and away the best route for all of the reasons, safety and security and management and everything else, as you might think, then we'll need to do it a different way. So we talked to a whole variety of people and said, at the time, 2017, 2018, talking about the size of the problem. We were talking about, we assumed something like 1 million plus families were disconnected. People didn't really get that. They said, and even if they got an understanding about the kind of numbers of families that may be disconnected, they certainly didn't understand the kind of urgency of that. And I think that was partly a timing thing. People were beginning to, technology was moving from being a kind of nice to have to a must have. But then, of course, the pandemic came along in 2020, and that instantly changed everybody's understanding about how important that was. Looking at it as a kind of sort of slightly seasoned observer, what I saw was fantastic amounts of work going on, just brilliant local organizations, local individuals and big organizations being involved, but that being very kind of, you talked about connecting the dots, for instance, that being not really well connected, not really strategic and things. And so we felt like, well, there's something we could bring to this piece here, which is bringing understanding and organizations together to try to tackle it more holistically. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. And that's where the Digital Poverty Alliance came from.
And I remember an earlier conversation on one of the previous episodes where we were talking about a million kids in the UK alone without a laptop, let alone kind of necessarily knowing what to do with their laptop and hooking into the inspiration and education and sustaining kind of the use of those devices. Andrea, keen to share both in terms of your personal story, but also Amazon's perspective as part or engaged with the Digital Poverty Alliance. So over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes. Thanks so much, Rob. I'm Andrea Ravnik, and I am with Amazon, and I lead our Amazon and the community team here in the UK. We're actually a global team, and really what that means is we support communities where Amazon has a presence, and we really focus on harnessing Amazon's spirit of innovation to support those communities. And one of our core focuses is access to technology. So it's very similar to what Paul was just saying. We really see the impact of technology in almost every aspect of our lives, and how it plays now both a major role in education as well as the economy at large. And specifically, we're committed to really creating more opportunities for young people from all backgrounds to have access to technology, right? So that's really what we're focused on. With my role at Amazon, I'm also an ambassador at the DPA and work closely alongside Paul and his team on how Amazon can kind of create opportunities to help conquer the digital divide here in the UK. But what I'm really excited about more is really my personal kind of perspective on this and why I'm really passionate about working in the space and being part of the DPA. I've actually had a 10 plus year career in technology, specifically marketing in technology, and recently only pivoted into this corporate philanthropy space about 6 months ago. And it's really within this space that I found that STEM education is a huge opportunity, and giving children and young people access to STEM education and visibility on STEM education as a huge area of opportunity. I actually grew up in a household where STEM was constantly present. My mom was a pharmacist, my dad was an engineer, and it really wasn't until much later in my life that I realized that science and technology were not obvious career paths for everyone, specifically girls. So really passionate about that from this perspective, and ensuring that really all young people have access to technology, have access to digital skills, and seeing not only how I can do that through my role at Amazon, but personally as well.
Angie, that's brilliant. And I think for everyone listening, they will already recognise correlation to digital responsibility and specifically the areas of societal sustainability and impacting people's lives across all groups, no matter where they are. Paul, tell me a bit more about how the DPA kind of operates then. So clearly it's not something that you're doing. I mean, we spoke first 12 months, 18 months ago. You've launched, you've got large businesses supporting the initiative, but how does it operate? How does it make a difference?
That's the big question, and I'm pleased to say that the timing for this podcast is absolutely perfect, because we are at a really important juncture with the DPA right now. One of the things we wanted to do was first of all, before you do anything, you have to kind of understand what the issue is. What are the details of that issue? Where are the gaps? And when I'm talking about gaps, I'm talking just as much about where the gaps might be in research and understanding about the issue. But equally could well be talking about geographical gaps, for instance. Where are there places in the country which are either struggling with things like connectivity, or might be struggling because there are no organizations based nearby that can help provide skills training, for instance, that kind of thing. And so we've just finished that exercise, and in fact in about 10 days time we'll be launching what's called the UK Evidence Review. And that was a summation, really, of everything that we have seen going on out there. And we've drawn from that a number of key principles, which we'll talk about later. But what's really important now for us, Rob, is taking that information and turning it into what we're calling a national delivery plan. And what I should say about the DPA really is the DPA itself, the core of the DPA is just 5 or 6 people. And long will it remain so. And that's because there are already such extraordinary organizations, including Amazon, who are already focused on this issue, who already can bring lots of resource and time and understanding to the issue. So the last thing we wanted to do was to duplicate any of that. And so we very much work through our partners, and the partners, as Andrew was saying, could well be individuals. So we have a fantastic collection of ambassadors, and but also we have we call it the sort of beating heart of the DPA, if you like, is what we refer to as our community board, and that community board represents all of life's interests. It sounds kind of odd, but what we're very well aware of also is that education, super important, and DFE is spending lots of time and money and effort looking at getting young people connected and getting them enabled and getting schools up and running. But those same people that are struggling with access from an education perspective are the same people who the NHS, for instance, will have as vulnerable, or DWP will have a focus because they're currently out of work or they're struggling on benefits or whatever it might be. And so what we wanted to do was to, instead of all of those going off on their own various different directions, is to bring them together. And so around that table, we have observers from most of the major government departments, including DCMS and others, but then people actually there practically doing it. So, big NHS trusts, UK finance representing the banking sector, housing associations being represented through single organizations. And that's just been fantastic, because there is anyway this sort of sense of shared endeavor about fixing the problem. And so when we launch the UK Evidence Review, what you'll see is when we talk about the DPA, it's not just us. It is a combined view about the way forward. And I can't wait for this next 6 months, because that's when we can begin to turn all of this understanding and support and interest into okay, so now who is going to do what to make the changes we need?
Which is a brilliant example of the returning to connecting the dots, because it sounds as though what you're doing is to make sure that there is cohesion between the various initiatives that organisations or government are driving, and awareness, shared awareness as to where that focus will achieve the best results. I'm intrigued to know how we measure or quantify or validate the impact that's being made. Perhaps we'll come back to that point a little later, but perhaps it would be interesting, Andrea, to understand some of the things that you've seen kind of happening across the UK, and some of the things that you're contributing to, and maybe some of the lessons that are emerging to that, but both positively and how to further improve. What would you highlight?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think from Amazon's perspective, one of our core programs that we run is called Amazon Future Engineer, which is our comprehensive childhood to career program, where we really look to inspire and enable children and young adults from lower income backgrounds to try computer science. And we're doing that through targeting really students that are identified through the UK's Income Deprivation Affecting Children Index, to identify which schools to work with. And we've been really successful in doing that. One program we've been running for a few years now here in the UK specifically is our Amazon Class Chats program, where we actually pair an Amazonian from a tech background to go in and speak to the class about what a career in technology looks like, how they use digital technology in their day-to-day, and really inspire and kind of motivate that train of thinking. But what we've actually found, like you were saying earlier, Rob, is 1 million children without access to laptops, is that the actual access to the technology to learn on, to play with, to engage with is just as imperative as the content that we're providing. So I think that's one of the biggest learnings we've seen specifically in the last year and in the last 6 months in my work with the DPA. Last year, we ran a campaign where we donated out 10,000 Fire tablets to schools, and Paul and I and our teams are working on a very similar campaign for 2022 as well. So I think it's a combination of access to both technology and the content that's going to make the biggest impact for children.
And perhaps a question to either of you. I'm just conscious that there could be all manner of challenges that we face, and we as the community trying to make a difference, trying to nudge things in an improved direction, whether that's investment, whether that's uptake, adoption, whether it's policy, strategic policy, government policy. What are you seeing as the things that we need to focus on as enablers? So what would really make a difference to accelerate some of the work that both you've already been involved or seeing to make a bigger impact?
That's another great question. But if it's okay, Andrew, one of the things I'd like to say is that, Rob, I'm very well aware of the work that you do on a global scale. And I have to say that one of the really important things for us at the DPA too is that we share that learning. So from our point of view, absolutely, the UK has a big problem of its own, and we want to bring people together to do that. But we live in an environment and a context and things at the moment politically and in many other ways, which enables that to happen. Okay, it may not always be possible to find everything that we need, but essentially we're as a country we are generally moving in that direction. We had a new UK digital strategy yesterday. Didn't talk about didn't talk about individuals being disconnected, which we were disappointed about, but nonetheless recommitted the country to being a digital leader in the future. But I've been really struck by World Economic Forum, for instance, is doing some work at the moment with they've set up something called the Edison Alliance, which again is about trying to learn all of the lessons from different places around the world that might help other countries and other individuals move forward. So big job to do here, but it'll be great ultimately for us to be part of this wider response to the issue. So, because one of the things we've learned the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic and others, Rob, isn't it, is just how interconnected we all are.
Absolutely, and I think it was brilliantly illustrated in the work that the UNEP, UN Environment Programme, sponsored CODES Global Action Plan. I mean, if you look at the back of that, you'll see lots of initiatives globally. Indeed, as you'll be aware, it mentions the DPA, it mentions CDR, and many other initiatives. And of course, there is an overlap. Actually, one of the key things it touches on is, and it's an explicit part of one of the principles of the CDR Manifesto, is the need to influence regulation and policy right. And I don't mean at a national government level. I mean just everywhere. So how do we create an environment whereby government and businesses and individuals, and I'll go back to your point actually, Paul, you said that was the membership of the DPA. It's kind of all segments of society aligned to get this kind of right balance of focus and enabling policy, regulation that kind of does prevent the negative aspects, or at least minimizes negative aspects, but at the same time creates positive outcomes. In the work, just thinking about that in terms of your work at the moment, and maybe both nationally and locally, what are you seeing in terms of government initiatives that are adjacent to the work that you're doing, or support the work that you're doing, or indeed vice versa, and maybe thinking about what would be even better if? Are those kind of conversations that you have within the DPA to try and help influence, from a positive impact point of view, some of those initiatives?
Mm-hmm. I love these questions. I love the question. Rob, well, one of the things I'm finding really just within the last few months, I suppose, I'm sensing this, and that is that a lot of the understanding about the need for everybody to be connected and enabled and supported, as Andrea said so well, not just about having devices, but then what the devices does in terms of opening up career opportunities and learning and play and fun and things like that as well, is that I think everybody's response in the early days, including ours, was very much about, right, let's get devices into hands. And we knew it wasn't perfect, but we felt like that was better than nothing. And sometimes it is, and arguably sometimes it isn't. But what's happened in the ensuing 2 or 3 years is that people have learned that isn't enough. And so one of the things I'm seeing is just, again, some really brilliant kind of joined up work going on, very much at these big conurbation levels. So, you'll be aware of some superb work going on in Manchester. Birmingham is really focused on this. London, at the moment, have got London Tech Week going on, which is looking at a lot of this kind of. So I'm seeing, and what's the beauty about that is what they're doing is, again, bringing together all sections of society and saying, okay, this is not just about kids, it's about people who are unemployed or people who are older, and where the priorities and what from the resources that we can bring together here. And those are driven by and large by individuals at a senior level in those local governments. So I can see that being, and then anyway, frankly, we see whatever we do on a national basis, the real change is going to be happening at a local basis. And it's one of the things that Andrew and I love is the fact that these are local schools getting on with doing what they can to enable their children to move on, and local communities supporting each other and that kind of thing. So the answer is lots of great stuff at a kind of local and regional level, but not so much yet at a national level, not in England anyway.
I think it's one of the really interesting things. If I wear a completely different hat, one of the things that I'm looking at the moment is at a regional level within the UK. what's the balance like around one particular set of skills, in this case blockchain, between the demand in local organizations and the supply capability coming out of academia and into that market, to understand whether actually at a regional level, is that something that's sustained in itself, or whether it has to go further afield. So it's an interesting area to look at. If we think about the next year, I mean, Paul, it sounds like the timing is just right from what you've said in terms of better understanding kind of the challenges that are faced and where focus needs to be. So if I could come to you both, and I'll start with you, Andrea, around in 22-23. What would be the kind of one or two things that you would say to anyone listening, whether as an individual or as an organisation, would be great for them to do, either directly with the DPA or indeed impacting the kind of areas that the DPA is focused on, together with, obviously, Andrea, the work that you're doing within Amazon? What would you highlight to people listening?
Yeah, I actually think it's pretty simple. And to echo Paul's comment about really being a community and looking how we can support the UK, both from a hyper-local perspective and then a national perspective, and to use a very Amazonian term, I think we've all got the individual opportunity to raise the bar on access to digital technology and using our own perspectives and experiences to actually really inspire young people and help young people specifically get access to digital technology. I'd encourage anyone who's willing to just engage with their local schools, their local community hubs, youth programs, whatever it might be, just to understand what kind of support they could benefit from. You know, even if it's as simple as going in on a Thursday afternoon and, you know, donating an hour of your time to speak to anyone about using technology, to train them on how to open a device, close a device, access apps. You know, I think that there are really basic things that everybody can do. And from an organizational perspective, you know, look and see how you can support with device donations, or what kind of campaigns, you know, your organization is, you know, specifically set up in to support from a digital divide perspective. I think each organization has a different reach, a different scale, a different set of products or programs that could uniquely benefit this challenge. And then, of course, join us in the DPA. I'm sure Paul will make that plug, so I'll pass to him.
Paul, over to you.
You know me well, Andrea. You know me well. Actually, one of the things I also wanted to say that's been great about working with Amazon is that they're equally keen, not just doing things, but understanding the impact that has. So, for instance, we're investing quite a lot of time and effort at the moment in working with universities to look at the work that we're doing. So, does it move schools along? Does it move individuals along? And if so, how? You talked earlier on about how you measure all of that, and it is problematic. I agree, but I'm pleased to say there's some more cleverer eyes and ears and brains on this than mine to be looking at that. But you will be seeing more of that. It's really important for us to be able to say this worked, that didn't work, not just for ourselves, but as I say, for us sharing outside. The only thing I agree with Andrea. I love all that. Absolutely, it is so easy, isn't it, just to wander along and knock on a door and say, "Can I help?" and that kind of thing, neighbours and things. So I'm very, very much for all of that. I think my message to organisations would be two things. Whether you're looking at customers or whether you're looking at staff, think about whether or not they are digitally enabled. One of the things that has continually confounded me is the numbers of organizations who are not aware. So they may be developing things, online offers, and bearing in mind online opportunities, and those people who may be offline and therefore not able to access it. So what do they need to do to respond to their needs? But then discovering actually that very large numbers of their own workforce are actually disconnected, or at least not well connected, or not what you might call digitally literate or things. So I would say to companies out there, if there's anything you can do, not just with when you're thinking about customers, whether or not there's anything you can be doing to enable them to engage with you online, better, rather than just producing an offline version all the time, but other things you can be investing in. I know, for instance, some organizations, if you can move somebody from an offline customer to online customer, there are major savings to be had. So why not invest some of that savings in enabling people to make that journey? And as I say, think about staff. And one of the conversations I had recently, which I really liked, was the idea that with appraisals, for instance, it might be something you could just pop into an appraisal to say, and how are you digitally? You know, do you feel confident using devices? Because that's not just about the individuals as individuals within your staff, but also for you as a company, because digital skills are going to be increasingly needed by companies, and the more your own staff are enabled to do that, the better, really.
Absolutely, completely agree with that point. Paul, Andrea, thank you very much for talking to us about the work that you're doing, both as Amazon and obviously as the Digital Poverty Alliance. I think kind of you suggested at the start of the call, it would be good to come back in maybe 6-9 months to kind of see some of the things that have made an impact and look at the impact that that's making. And there is a much broader conversation around the measurement of that perhaps another time.
Definitely.
So until then, thank you very much, and
Yes.
Pleasure.
have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you
Both.
so much, Rob. Yeah,
Thanks,
talk soon.
Rob.
Thank you, Andrea. See you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.